think every single person on this planet needs to be educated and re-educated about climate change. We are dedicated as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to embrace this education issue.
We can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
State Congress voted to ban abortion. Alternate universe located.
Global temperatures rise.
The effects on social media on Generation Z.
To avoid catastrophe, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs, the epicenter of a global pandemic.
No exception for rape or incest.
So we just heard from Chris, a meteorologist from the United States, who after talking about climate change on TV, when he was doing his weather reports, started receiving death threats. Unfortunately, it's not unique. An investigation by the United Nations Educational, Science and Cultural Organization last revealed that 70% of environmental journalists have been attacked for their work. In the studio, we now have 3 reporters who have all experienced these increasing attempts to discourage their climate reporting. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mateus Fernandes of Info Perifer Institute, Katia Brazil, Executive Director of Amazonia Real, and Peter Alsteig or Alsteig?
Alsteig.
Okay, who's the editor of Climate Change of, I'll probably get this wrong as well, Dagnens Nyheter?
Good enough.
Good enough, okay, which is a Swedish newspaper. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. We also have with us Yael Taluchi. You do it. Go on.
You know how to say it.
I'm so bad at that. He's the communications director for the Planetary Science Pavilion, who will act as a translator during this session. So thank you so much for being here. All right, let's go. Katia, let's start with you. Please tell us about the threats or risks you have experienced when reporting on climate change and environmental issues.
Kátia, por favor, nos diga quais os riscos e ameaças que você recebe quando você faz reportagens sobre o meio ambiente ou mudanças climáticas.
Primeiro, agradeço pelo convite da You Have Done Times. É o único espaço que nós, nessa COP inteira, que nós estamos falando sobre segurança dos jornalistas. Não há nenhum outro local aqui que foi aberto esse espaço. Obrigada por isso.
First, I would
Na
like to
ECO
say,
92 houve... Tá.
First, I'd like to say thank you for We Don't Have Time. It's the only space at this COP where we can talk about the safety of journalists. No others welcomed this debate.
Na ECO 92, no Rio de Janeiro, em 1992, houve um evento chamado Green Press, antes da conferência, onde os jornalistas, principalmente que cobrem o meio ambiente, participaram de um encontro. Depois não houve, nunca mais a nossa voz foi escutada em conferências.
During ECO 92 in Rio, there was an event called Green Press, where journalists talk about the risks and the threats they face. But since then, there has been no events like that where journalists gather to talk about it.
Eu sou uma jornalista que me formei no Rio de Janeiro e em 1990 parti para a Amazônia, porque eu tinha um sonho de fazer grandes reportagens. E demorou mais ou menos um ano para eu começar a realizar esse sonho por causa dos jornais, que eles não falavam sobre desmatamento, queimadas. Eu era proibida a visitar terras indígenas e fui muito ameaçada. Logo no primeiro ano eu fui ameaçada de morte porque eu investiguei um assassinato de um advogado.
So I graduated in Rio, and then in 1999, 1990, I moved to the Amazon because I wanted to do a great environmental reporting. And it took me a year to start doing that because the newspapers there wouldn't give me space. And as I started to do reporting, I received death threats because I covered the murder of an environmental advocate.
Então, eu tive que passar por muitas dificuldades, né? Desde o assédio moral, assédio de gênero, e também violências de demissões por chefes que são ligados à mineração, à madeira, né? Temos políticos ligados a madeireiras. Então, eu tive que passar por tudo isso até chegar a 2013 para fundar a Amazônia Real, em Manaus, e cobrir de fato a Amazônia como a gente quer, como os povos merecem.
So I suffered a lot of harassment, moral harassment, gender harassment. I was fired a number of times because the owners of the papers were politicians connected to illegal logging or mining. And it took me until 2013 to create Amazonia Real and really start to cover the Amazon the way that the people of the Amazon wanted and needed to be.
Então, todas as matérias que nós fazemos, todos os jornalistas que vão para o campo, na Amazônia Real, eles vão com protocolos de segurança rígidos para poder ir e voltar com segurança, porque eles podem enfrentar, por exemplo, pistoleiros nas estradas, eles podem enfrentar ataques nos barcos, e também nós não viajamos com lideranças, porque as lideranças são super ameaçadas, e a presença dos jornalistas nessas regiões remotas da Amazônia ameaçam muito mais essas pessoas. Então, a gente criou esses códigos próprios para justamente fazer as investigações, que são inúmeras, né? Quando se envolve crime ambiental, a Amazônia em desafio, como ela está sendo especulada, invadida os territórios, os jornalistas também precisam se cuidar, porque eu acho que mesmo que a Forbidden Story, ela tem um termo que fala que a nossa única voz vai calar. Mas nós não queremos que a nossa voz cale. A gente quer continuar levantando, divulgando, escrevendo, relatando essas violações.
So at Amazonia Real, we created journalism protocols to protect the journalists that go into the field. So all of them follow strict safety protocols because they can face a threat of gunmen on the roads or on rivers. They also do not travel with local leaders because the presence of journalists increases the threats to the local leaders when they are in the Amazon because people don't want their voices to be heard. So following these protocols is incredibly important for us to be able to continue to tell our stories and not to have our voices be silenced.
Let's go and ask Matthias the same question, which is tell us about the threats and risks from your reporting.
Matheus, mesma pergunta para você. Quais os riscos e ameaças que você sofre?
Olá, tudo bem? Chamo Matheus Fernandes. Muito obrigado pelo convite. É muito importante ter esse momento de fortalecer a comunicação e a integridade também das informações em espaços como esse.
Hi, thank you. My name is Mateus. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really important to have moments and opportunities like this to have this important debate.
Eu sou formado em jornalismo e o meu jornalismo ele veio da luta por moradia, uma luta que é voltada para as pessoas de periferia. Então, quando a gente olha hoje a comunicação, desde o meu processo de formação e até a atuação nesse trabalho, a gente sente que tem uma dificuldade muito grande que é falar dessas pessoas que estão mais vulneráveis.
I graduated in journalism, and the reason I studied journalism is to tell the story of housing and people that live in poor housing conditions and don't have access to housing. And still today, it's really hard to find the spaces to really make those voices heard and tell those stories.
Em 2023, eu fiz uma pesquisa jornalística fazendo uma denúncia sobre casos de crianças e jovens que tinham contato e adoecimento por conta de esgoto a céu aberto, a falta do saneamento básico nas periferias, culpabilizando uma empresa que fazia o descarte inadequado naquele rio onde moravam pessoas. Esse processo me gerou também quase um processo jurídico.
So in 2023, I did a report on the environmental conditions and the lack of sanitation and how it impacts the health of kids that live in these areas. And I reported and named a company that was responsible for throwing in all the residues on open air in these communities, and that led to me being sued and receiving legal threats.
Acho que tanto para mim quanto para outros jornalistas negros brasileiros, temos uma dificuldade muito grande que é a proteção. A gente precisa fazer esse trabalho de denúncia, só que não temos muito canais de proteção a essa integridade da nossa vida.
To me and many other Black Brazilian journalists, we have the challenge of protection. There are not many ways for us to receive protection, and that just makes our work much harder.
Então, hoje é muito importante que eu utilize a minha voz para falar dessas pessoas que não estão nesses espaços, mas também me coloco em risco. Não consigo ter uma vida comum como eu gostaria. Mas é muito importante que a gente continue e se conecte com outras pessoas para que a gente esteja protegido. Eu acho que falar de meio ambiente, falar de comunicação, a gente precisa falar de proteção, a gente precisa falar sobre vida.
So I feel that's really important for me that have access to speak about these issues in the spaces, bring these issues to spaces where the people that I work with are not at, and that the work of protection, the issue of protection for journalists is really important. And I do this even knowing that it might increase the level of risks that reach me.
Before I come to Peter, yeah, I wanted to ask one question of both our Brazilian friends here. Is this a threat to journalists getting worse? And how does this government, which is so appears to be so interested in doing the honest and good things? Marina Silva, we know, was threatened very much for her work on the environment. How do they stand and allow this to continue?
Como que esse governo ele se mostra e permite que isso continue?
Então, eu preciso comparar o governo Lula com o governo Bolsonaro. Em 2022, né, o Jair Bolsonaro, da extrema-direita, assumiu o governo e ele simplesmente, na sua campanha, anunciou que não ia demarcar nem 1 centímetro de terra. E na campanha isso se concretizou e vieram inúmeras ameaças, inclusive para os jornalistas, principalmente para as mulheres. Não só dele, mas de todas as pessoas ligadas a ele.
So it's important that I contrast the Lula government with the previous government from Jair Bolsonaro. When Jair Bolsonaro came to power, he made a promise that he would not demarcate an inch of indigenous lands, and he fulfilled that promise. But with that came a lot of threats to journalists and to environmental defenders, especially women. And it was not just from Bolsonaro himself, but also from a lot of people that supported him.
Então, durante a pandemia, né, nós estávamos cobrindo a pandemia e um correligionário ligado ao Bolsonaro, ele passou 1 hora no Facebook xingando eu e a Elaís Farias, que é a outra fundadora da Amazônia Real. Nós sofremos ataques misóginos porque publicamos uma reportagem dizendo que o vírus iria chegar nas terras indígenas, dos indígenas isolados. Eles diziam que era mentira e que a gente estava patrocinando ONGs, nós estávamos recebendo dinheiro de ONG para publicar essa reportagem.
So during the pandemic, we did a report saying that the coronavirus would reach the areas of uncontacted indigenous tribes, and some of Bolsonaro's followers spent hours on Facebook just cursing at myself and my co-founder, and we started to receive a lot of threats because we're basically doing this reporting, and they were claiming that we were receiving resources from international NGOs to be doing our work.
Então, se eu for comparar com o governo Lula, certamente, num país democrático como nós estamos vivenciando agora, é muito mais tranquilo a imprensa trabalhar. Mas eu represento uma mídia independente investigativa sem fins lucrativos. Nós não recebemos dinheiro de empresas, nem recebemos dinheiro de mineradoras, que estão, inclusive, patrocinando a imprensa na cobertura dessa COP. Então, a gente recebe dinheiro de doações, de filantropias e dos leitores. Então, é muito difícil. Nós estamos aqui, na verdade, com a raça, com a coragem, porque se a gente fosse pensar das dificuldades, nós não estaríamos aqui cobrindo essa COP. Mas ainda há muitas dificuldades com o governo Lula, que é o acesso da mídia independente aqui presente. São poucos veículos que conseguiram chegar aqui e são pequenos veículos que cobrem meio ambiente, a crise climática, que conseguiram chegar aqui. Existem inúmeros jornalistas que não conseguiram pisar em Belém.
So there's a marked difference, and Lula's government it is much better, and there's more safety. But what we see now is the difference between established media and the independent media. And established media sometimes receives money from large corporations, mining groups, and independent media struggles to cover events like this. Like we are here, but many other independent groups and small media outlets have not had the capacity to come to COP.
Let me go to Peter because he's been sitting patiently there. Peter, you're a climate change editor at the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter. Say it properly for me.
Dagens Nyheter.
Dagens Nyheter. Okay. The morning daily newspaper in Sweden, the leading one. Reporting from Sweden is a different story than Brazil, but can you relate to what you've just heard?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that this is a global trend that we're seeing. And, covering climate and environment is actually one of the most dangerous fields you can get into as a journalist, which in itself is kind of shocking, to be honest. But of course, in Sweden, it's not deadly, but we do receive threats and a lot of bashing in social media and a lot of anger. And I think it comes down to, that you are threatening financial interests. That is the common denominator. And in Sweden, the connection is not as direct as in Brazil when it's, people logging who receive the climate reporting as a threat or environment reporting as a threat. But in Sweden, it's more that the economic interest casts doubt on climate change, and then we are accused of being alarmist. We are threatening people's what they perceive as their right to drive their car, their right to fly across the world. And that creates anger with people. So I think, a few years ago, I had the feeling that this was going away. I had the feeling that, okay, now people are finally accepting the science. But we do see a backlash now, and that's very concerning.
So, I mean, I was a journalist too on the Times newspaper in London, covering the environment and science in the 1990s. And there was never any, the only violence I got was from my chief sub-editor for making some mistake or something. That was the most violent it ever got, right? But, so I think there's something has changed. It may be social media. People feel they can be aggressive and hide. But also maybe because those that want an environmentally better future might just be starting to win. And those big economic interests are fighting like devils to make sure this doesn't happen.
I mean, I would certainly hope that is the case.
Yeah.
So then it's like their last effort to silence the truth bringers.
Maybe.
But I also, I think there's a big risk as well that, the situation, especially for people covering the Amazon and other very dangerous regions, but also in countries like Sweden or the UK, that you also see the self-censorship within journalists. And I mean, when I talk to other reporters, when I do education in climate reporting to other reporters, then I have to warn them, what you're getting into is not going to be pleasant. And I think that can lead to people actually choosing not to cover climate change and choosing not to cover environment.
Okay, good, Peter. Let's come back to our friends from Brazil. Obviously, you mentioned that the political cycle here is very significant as it has changed from one government to Bolsonaro, then Bolsonaro back to Lula. This is important. But behind it all, there are those people that don't want you to report. Sometimes they hide a little bit when Lula's in power,
Às vezes eles
but they're still there, right?
quando eles estão no poder, mas eles
Is that correct? And
é verdade.
what would you want to
O
change?
que você gostaria
The
que
police to be
mudasse?
more supportive,
A polícia,
or are the police also part of the problem?
ou a polícia é parte do problema?
Eu vejo que temos muitas dificuldades estruturais para fazer uma cobertura de comunicação. Eu acho que entender que é um sistema que muitas vezes decide o que cobrir, quem vive, quem morre, não somente o policiamento, mas as próprias instituições, os governos locais, as prefeituras. A gente está falando de um Brasil onde mais mata ativistas e jornalistas climáticos, né?
I see there's a huge challenge to covering these topics and showing who decides what coverage goes to, who gets to live, who gets to die, who gets to say, who gets to be silenced. And we're talking about a country where you have one of the highest levels of threats and murders of environmental journalists and activists.
Vejo que precisamos de mudanças, talvez alguma política pública que olhe para a segurança da nossa integridade, assim como também o policiamento tem casos de denúncia, você ter algum tipo de apoio, enfim, de manter o seu anonimato. Mas para chegar nesse nível, não seria necessário que a gente passasse por violências. Deveria ser algo já assegurado pelas grandes corporações de comunicação onde a gente tem feito o nosso trabalho. Agora imagine esse mesmo cenário sendo um jornalista independente. A gente não tem recurso para fazer essa proteção.
And there should be some kind of support, maybe some public policy or some policing support to protect us and eventually get us to be covered and to become anonymous and to disappear for a while. But this should be embraced by the large journalism corporations, and they should be offering this to their staff, which makes it even trickier if you think about independent journalism that doesn't have the capacity to offer this to people.
Mas para deixar uma mensagem rápida, eu acho sim que a gente precisa de apoio governamental, a gente também precisa de apoio das nossas comunidades para trabalhar de maneira coletiva, porque esse trabalho do jornalista, ele não é um trabalho solitário, ele é um trabalho que precisa ser feito a muitas pessoas, juntas, porque assim a gente tem mais força. Eu vejo que o nosso trabalho ele fortalece a democracia, vejo que esse trabalho da democracia ele precisa ser feito com as mãos de quem está sendo mais impactado. Então, apesar desses dados me assustarem, eu acredito muito no poder coletivo.
And I want to leave a final quick message that this work that we do, it's not an individual job, it's a collective job, and it needs to be supported by our communities. Because what we're doing there is making and creating conditions for these communities to be stronger. And by doing this, we strengthen democracy. And so this work is super important. And I hope that this support and this collaboration starts to take place so we can continue to do it and to expand it.
Eu não vejo como melhorar, na verdade, porque nós temos uma eleição em 2026, em que o presidente Lula pode se candidatar à reeleição, né? Mas nós estamos num país dividido pela polarização. E temos um problema sério na questão ambiental, que é o negacionismo. E essas pessoas elas continuam se armando. E existe um problema com os jornalistas agora, que não é só a ameaça pelas redes sociais, é o assédio judicial das ações que a gente recebe.
I'm not sure it can get better. 2026, we have elections coming, and we know Lula might be trying to run for re-election, but we also know that the other side is getting ready to fight and come back to power. And what we see is that these folks are not just getting armed to deliver violence or social media threats, they're also getting ready to threat us judicially. And that's a huge challenge that we have if they come after us using the legal system.
Então, a partir de 2020, a gente começou a receber os processos. Nós temos uma reportagem que foi realizada sobre um passeio durante a pandemia que estava ilegal, navegar nos rios. Na verdade, era uma reportagem que já vinha sendo divulgada. Nós investigamos os donos dos barcos e descobrimos que são empresários ricos de Manaus.
So we started to receive this legal challenges already and being sued. For example, in 2020, we did a report during the pandemic when taking people out on boat trips was not allowed. There were these companies taking tourists out, and we investigated this. And what we found is that it was owned by really rich business people from Manaus.
Então, essa reportagem está censurada há 3 anos. Tem uma outra reportagem, sim, que fala da questão ambiental, que é sobre uma empresa que produz açaí, e o repórter foi ouvir a comunidade, e a comunidade reclamou de poluição, de peixes mortos no lago. Essa reportagem foi realizada, inclusive, aqui no estado do Pará. E os empresários também entraram com uma ação. E para a gente, nós não temos recursos para contratar advogados, então nós começamos a pedir o apoio das organizações que apoiam nós, jornalistas independentes, como a Abrage, a Repórteres Sem Fronteiras e o Torna-Voz.
So that story has been censored for 3 years now. And another story we did around acai production, we went to the communities and we heard the communities and they were complaining about pollution, about fish dying on the lakes. And the corporation that was running the operations there is also suing us. And we don't have the resources to fight these legal battles. So we're asking for support from the organizations that support independent journalism, like Abrage and Jornavoz and Reporters Without Borders and Media Defense.
I hope some people out there with these organizations heard that. And maybe we can do some social media connected with this broadcast to highlight those organizations.
Nos conectarmos com essas organizações
Yeah.
nas redes sociais.
Sim, agradeço muito. Obrigada.
Maybe just one last question to everybody, really, which is maybe first with our friends from Brazil, but will you be reporting about the President Lula government wanting to drill for oil in the Amazon? And how do you think that will be received?
Boa pergunta. Essa é uma questão que atinge muitos povos indígenas da Amazônia, principalmente da região do Amapá. Nós estamos vendo aí nas negociações da COP, nos últimos instantes, os países ricos não estão querendo abrir mão da exploração dos combustíveis fósseis. O próprio presidente Lula já fez uma declaração aqui um pouco conturbada de dizer que o recurso dessa exploração possa, inclusive, beneficiar o financiamento da adaptação climática, né? Que é impossível. Se realmente ocorrer essa exploração no Amapá, ecossistemas, povos até isolados vão ser atingidos. Eu acompanhei muito bem a exploração de petróleo em Quari, onde mais de 5.000 homens trabalharam naquela área.
So yes, if Lula goes ahead with this, it's going to be really challenging. It affects communities, it affects indigenous peoples. It will have huge environmental impacts. But we also see it here at COP. The rich countries don't want to sign on. They want to keep exploring fossil fuels. Even President Lula made a declaration saying that the resources from fossil fuels should be paying for the energy transition. And I've seen this story before. I reported on Coari, an oil field in the Amazon where there were 5,000 men working on fossil fuel exploration.
Yes, it's certainly complex, but there are certainly some northern. Let's not mention the United States of America right now, but there are other northern European countries that would quite like to get off fossil fuels. So it's a more complicated picture. Yeah. And Mendes, from your point of view, is this a big challenge to report on the oil in the Amazon?
Eu acho que não é um assunto difícil para nós que vivencia isso no cotidiano. Nós sabemos quem são as pessoas que estão sendo mais impactadas, a gente sabe as histórias, os territórios. A dificuldade é a gente ter alcance dessa voz, é que a mídia repercuta também o que a gente está contando.
We know this is a challenging issue. We know the communities that are getting impacted. We know their stories. We know their voices. We know who they are. But it's really hard to get larger media to amplify and to tell the stories of these groups and these people.
E independente do governo, seja este ou o próximo, nosso trabalho é o fortalecimento da democracia. Então, continuaremos a falar as histórias das pessoas que não estão sendo ouvidas.
Mas sim, but yes, we will continue to tell the stories of the people who don't have a voice, because our work is to strengthen democracy. So independent of this government, whatever next government will be, we will continue to expose the stories that need to be told.
I'd just like to say, Peter, there was a really good report from Amnesty International that showed there are now something like 2 billion people in the world impacted by fossil fuel infrastructure in terms of health and other things. And I missed that, but I thought that was a very 2 billion people impacted by oil and gas infrastructure. Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up here, boys and girls. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, yes, one moment.
Só gostaria de comentar, porque o jornalista brasileiro, quando ele diz que ele é ameaçado, geralmente nem o editor dele acredita que ele é ameaçado.
I wanted to add that Brazilian journalists, when they say that they're being threatened and they're receiving threats, usually not even their editors believe that they're actually receiving threats.
Eu também gostaria de falar das mulheres que sofrem assédio nas redações. Por exemplo, aqui na COP, algumas mulheres foram empurradas por fotógrafos, foram intimidadas por fotógrafos. Então, existe um machismo exacerbado na imprensa brasileira contra as mulheres.
And I want to highlight especially the case of women that feel harassed in the redaction, in the rooms, including here at COP, where they get pushed and shoved to the side by photographers. There is a lot of sexism and misogyny in Brazilian press.
E só para finalizar, em 2023, a Repórter Sem Fronteiras fez um relatório só sobre os jornalistas da Amazônia e levantou 66 casos de violência na produção das reportagens, e principalmente violações à liberdade de imprensa, o assédio judicial, o assédio moral, inclusive a desacreditar das nossas palavras. Então, esse relatório não foi publicado pela imprensa do Pará.
Reporter Without Borders in 2023 produced a report, and they highlighted over 60 cases of moral, legal harassment against journalists, and this reporting was not covered by any media in Pará.
All right, thank you very much for these points. We have about 2 million people watching our shows around the world, so they have been well received, I think, by a global public. And today we have a special day on democracy, and this was very important to have you on our show. Thank you very much indeed. I think every single person on this planet needs to be educated and re-educated about climate change. We are dedicated as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to embrace this education issue.
We can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally say, tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
State Congress voted to ban abortion. Alternate universe located.
Global temperatures rise.
The effects on social media on Generation Z.
To avoid catastrophe, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs, the epicenter of a global pandemic.
No exception for rape or incest.
There was a time, not too long ago, where climate and environmental policy were seen as bipartisan issues, something that unified rather than divided the public and the voters, not least in the United States. This period is captured in the new documentary film The White House Effect, which was released on Netflix in the run-up to COP30. We will soon have the great pleasure to speak to the director of the film, Bonnie Cohen. But first, let's watch a few minutes of the film.
2023 was the hottest year on record by a long shot.
Energy conservation has got to become a way of life.
We'll make America great again.
1988 is the warmest year on the record.
Those who think we're powerless to do anything about this greenhouse effect are forgetting about the White House effect. And as president, I intend to do something about it.
In all the years since scientists began tracking temperature, the year that just ended was the warmest.
It's happening. The warming has begun.
George Bush wins.
We need a new attitude about the environment.
Bill Riley has agreed to serve as the administrator of the EPA.
I found myself asking the question, is this really the best we can do?
John Sununu will be George Bush's White House Chief of Staff.
I don't think America wants not to be able to use their automobiles.
Many in the environmental community are questioning your watering down global warming. What do you say to that?
There's as many scientists who say that there's not global warming as scientists who say there is.
Two diametrically opposed points of view. Now, where does that leave us?
Well, what have we done that's so bad?
If the Bush administration force you to change a scientific conclusion, it's science fraud by them.
Wake up. If you are the environmental president, why don't you defend your own environmentalist?
People will start asking early in the next century, what is nature doing to us? It's not nature doing to us, it's what we're doing to nature and to ourselves.
This problem has reached a new stage.
Is science for sale?
Environmental protection is about sustaining life on Earth. We dare not ignore it.
It is now my great pleasure to welcome on Zoom film director Bonnie Cohen. Bonnie, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
First of all, I would just like to thank you for having made this movie. I watched it just before taking off to Belém, and I really, really enjoyed it. It also upset me, but that wasn't because of the filmmaking, but because of the content.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yes,
curious
the
to know.
It does have that effect on people.
Yeah. I'm curious to know what made you want to tell this story.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. Just to say, we were a community of filmmakers who have all made quite a bit of content in this space, in the climate crisis, climate change space. My co-directors, John Schenk, Pedro Cos, and I have worked together before. We made The Island President with Mohammed Nasheed of the Maldives, and John and I made an inconvenient sequel with Al Gore about 5 years ago. No, 8 years ago now. And we're trying to figure out, as we all do, how to move the needle with film, with moving people's hearts and minds around this issue, because it just, as you know, seems so hard to do. And so we decided to consider going back to what some consider the origin story of the climate crisis, the moment in the late 80s when the subject of the climate became a political football. That was not always the case, and we found that fascinating, how the divisiveness, the politicization, the disinformation started to creep in, and when that happened and why. And we thought if we could tell that story completely in the archival materials of the time, sort of sink the viewer into the contemporary archival experience, that might be an irrefutable way to tell this story. And so we started down our 5-year course of gathering all of that archival, editing that archival, and eventually crafting this structure and this film.
Back at this period, the late 80s, it's almost like watching a fantasy movie. This is actually a period where a Republican candidate could run a campaign on environmental issues. It's, it's almost, And it wasn't only in the States. I mean, look at the UK, where the Iron Lady herself, Margaret Thatcher, really pushed for urgent global action to curb global warming and really stood up for scientific research. When you look back, when you went through all this footage, what struck you the most about the political climate back then?
It's really interesting. There was the purpose of the film, and what we wanted to concentrate on was this moment in American history where there was a terrible drought in the country that was affecting everyone, including the farmers. There was all the science was in from the scientific community, who had sort of put all of the dots together to connect what was going on with the greenhouse gases and how it was affecting our world and our climate. And the will of the American people was in place. We all saw an opportunity to actually act on climate. And of all things, there was a Republican candidate for president who seemed to really get that and be interested in the possibilities of what we could do together as a country. So all of these forces were in place. There was a little crack. The window was open for us to take action. And I think all of us on our team found that really sort of extraordinary, optimistic. Of course, we see what happens with the story, but in the end, is there an opportunity for us to get back to that place where we were, where all of these elements were in place for us to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing? So that was motivating for us as a film team.
And have you come up with an answer to that question? Is there a way to get us back to that time where this scientific issue, which it really is again seen as a bipartisan issue?
I mean, if I had the answer to that question, I'd not be sitting here on my sofa in San Francisco. I'd probably be screaming from a slightly different pulpit. But I think that it's important to look at, the Biden infrastructure bill and how important a moment that was in American history. That was maybe the most important climate bill that really ever passed and was in action in the United States. It was not that long ago. How did we get there? How did we get to a place where the manufacturing of alternative energy, the use of alternative energy really was a priority in this country? Obviously, it has been now taken away from us, but that existed. We can get back there. There is enough factual information, scientific, industrial, will of the people to get back to that place. So we hold on to that. We have to look at history and we have to recognize how difficult it is to garner support for the environment and alternative energies when there's an economy that's threatening people's jobs, their ability to get to work, feed their kids. That's what happened back in the late 80s, early 90s. The economy started to tank, and then the environmental concerns just went out the window. So we're constantly in this balance. We now have the opportunity to do the right thing on behalf of the environment and have the economy benefit from it. And we have to really go back and concentrate on that again.
Your film also clearly shows the change of narratives here. It tells the story on how oil companies managed to infiltrate key figures in the White House and turn the Republican Party from a party who took climate change and climate science very seriously to started sowing doubt about the science, and now we're in a point today where they're almost denying it. Why, in your opinion, why do you think the oil companies were so successful in shaping this narrative?
I mean, it's also against a backdrop, just to say, of Exxon doing their own research into the climate crisis and the effects of carbon dioxide and fossil fuels on the environment. So this happened when they also even knew what was going on from a scientific perspective. So it's even more egregious. There were allies in the White House. John Sununu was letting that narrative, that corporate greed narrative, infiltrate into the White House and then out to the American people. And he had there was a way in which that was accomplished by creating a disinformation campaign about what was going on scientifically. That was sort of the fossil fuel companies were able to sort of help craft this narrative to keep the strength of their corporate entities pumping out, what they were pumping out, and at the same time, sort of brainwashing the American people that it was the right thing to do. That was, I don't know if it was the first time, but in our research, it was a very critical focal time for that disinformation to start creeping in to the hearts and minds of the American people through over the radio waves, over the television waves, and the right alchemy of the way that the fossil fuel companies were working with the White House and working with the media conglomerates. That messaging started to push out and become a possibility.
Yeah. What are you hoping that the viewers take with them after having watched the film?
We have found that history is truth. You can't deny history. You have to look at it, you have to regard it, you have to learn from it. We don't have any contemporary voices influencing this historical narrative in this film. And that's sort of an irrefutable proposition. And so our hope is that viewers will see this story, sort of see the way that it transformed the way thinking has happened in the decades that have followed, and be angry about it. It will hopefully create some rage. Rage is a form of activism, and activism turns people out to vote. This is ultimately a film about who we elect and how those decisions influence the world we live in directly. So it's our hope that it will get people out to the polls, it will get people voting in the right direction, and get us back on track to help save the environment.
You briefly touched on this in the beginning, but what kind of reactions have you gotten so far from both sides?
Because we don't have, it was really our intention to have this film really speak for itself. The film, when you see it, it spends a lot of time on the streets with the American people. We really sort of give voice to all of these different sectors of the population, regular citizens on the street, the scientific community, the environmental community, the political community, and of course the industrial and corporate communities. So it is our hope that people see themselves in this film, and that is what's happened. No one really has felt very marginalized by this film. They sort of can see themselves on both sides of the aisle, and it has sparked really interesting conversation as a result of that. I think a lot of political folks did not realize or remember that George Bush Sr. had run as an environmental candidate, and that's a very important talking point for bringing people together.
Bonnie Cohen, thank you so much for joining our broadcast here today. This film is really a film worth talking about at the COP meeting. And for all of you watching this film, The White House Effect, it is now available on Netflix. It's basically based totally on archived footage, which makes it, I would say, stunning. I really liked it, so watch it, and let's all try to learn something from it. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now let's move on.
Journalists are no longer the only ones facing threats and violence when they speak truth to power. For the past few years, the number of people living in democracies has been declining. Since 2017, the number of electoral democracies has fallen from 96 to 88 countries, according to Our World in Data. That's quite staggering numbers, huh? To make things worse, recent reports show that criminalization and repression of activists have intensified worldwide and just in the past few years. So we're now going to meet with two activists in the front line of this in our Stockholm studio. Let's say we can connect with Stockholm. We have David Alsa. David is from Germany, as I'm informed, but he resides and works in Lund, in Sweden, where he is working at Lund University, and he's also active in the organization Restore the Wetlands. And let's see if we can connect with Stockholm and say hello to David. Meanwhile, while this happens, let's turn to Zoom, where we have Geoffrey Mboya. Hello, Geoffrey. Wonderful to see you here. We wanted to have you here in Berlin, but that didn't work for several reasons. But, well, we're happy to have you take part of our broadcast like this. So, Geoffrey, you are the democracy activist and also a community organizer. So how are you today, Geoffrey?
Thanks, Katerina, for having me today. Really glad to be part of this panel. I really wish to be present in Berlin, but circumstances couldn't allow, but really happy to join virtually. So I'm really fired up and ready for this panel today.
Excellent. So I guess we need to get started, even if we don't have David with us. So, Geoffrey, you're quite big on Instagram. You're great on social media. And lately in your feed, we have seen some very violent and bloody images lately, where the people have opened fire and also killed demonstrators on several occasions. So could you please tell us what this is about?
Well, just to start off, generally, democracy is under attack in East Africa. As a region, we've seen how repression has been continuously used by our governments. And by that, I mean the governments of Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. As East Africa community, we've just witnessed one of the shocking election outcomes that just happened in Tanzania, where it is being reported that as of now, reports of over 3,000 citizens have been murdered because of an electioneering period. As we witness the election outcome in Tanzania, which both the AU, both the African Union has declared as unfair election outcome, but also one that has been largely dominated by the main party. These are some of the effects that we think are going to spill over the entire region, because the next year, 2026, we are watching very closely the Ugandan elections. And also we know for sure 2027, we will have general election in Kenya. And so the president that is being set in Tanzania has a tremendous effect on the entire region. So we are paying attention to what is the world talking about Tanzanian situation, because we know very well the main party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, which is called CCM, barred the opposition party from partaking the elections. So they arrested the opposition figure, Tundu Lissu, who is an important political figure in Tanzania. He's being charged of treason. And so what president is being witnessed in Tanzania informs us as a region to pay closely to the developments that are happening there. And I'm sure this is a conversation that is ongoing, that we need to protect democracy. And we've seen largely that young people across the continent are stepping out to really partake in the political question, because some of the decisions the leaders are making today, they will not affect them, they will affect majority of the demographic. If you've seen the unrest happening in Madagascar, the unrest happening in Mozambique, the unrest happening in Morocco, the unrest happening in different parts of the continent, which have also inspired in other regions such as Asia. This is to tell you that it is a very significant moment that young people are taking political decisions very seriously, and we are ready to inform our government that we are ready to be part of political discourse in our country.
Geoffrey, and I see that we now have David Alsa with us in the studio in Stockholm. Wonderful to see you, David. So, David, you are a researcher at the Lund University Nano Lab, and Lund University is actually just ranked as the most sustainable university in the world in a quite recent ranking. So, congratulations for that. But you're also an activist, so it might sound like a pretty safe place to be in Sweden at a university of this caliber and to also be an activist, but that is really not the story. So could you please tell us, David?
Yes, I have come to Sweden from Germany to do a PhD on solar cell development, and I'm now employed at Lund University. I'm also using my voice to speak up about climate justice, which has led the police to target me recently. So during the past year, the border police has detained me 2 times without any crime suspicions in the middle of my everyday life. So once when I was going to work, once when biking home, and they took me for an interrogation about my right to be in Sweden, where they did not allow my lawyer to be present. And most recently, they have threatened me with deportation and locked me up in a migration detention center. I was released the next afternoon, but the threat of deportation is still there, now coming from the migration agency, who has received a recommendation from the border police to deport me. All of this because of my climate activism. But really, this is not about me. It is an attack on democracy here in Sweden. Sweden is known for having a long democratic tradition, with civil society having a strong voice and having an impact on decisions. But this is rapidly retracting because politicians are restraining the space in which civil society can express their opinions, and politicians undermine the role of protest, which my story is a result of.
This is really disturbing, David, and when I read about it in my local newspaper, I live close to Lund, I was shocked because you were really tossed into an anonymous car when you were bicycling to work one day, and this is not a behavior that you as a Swede would expect, right? And Sweden has also been criticized by the special envoy to the United Nations for not really respecting the rights of activists. So this is indeed alarming. It is indeed. So a question to both you and Geoffrey is: this violence and this abusive behavior against activists is really increasing. So if I start with you, Geoffrey, why do you think this is happening now, and why is it increasing?
Thank you so much, Katerina, for that. I think we are increasingly witnessing the rise of far-right governments across the entire world. I have been reading geopolitics from different regions, and I tend to see, as a world, we are shifting towards more far and extreme governments generally. And as even we witness at this COP30 the US government withdrawing from Paris government, the Paris Agreement, and not really partaking into the climate commitment and deliberation that is really, really important to frontline our stance as a world towards a greener and a better world for all of us. It is quite a significant political moment that we're witnessing, and the repression of activists. It has long been a culture of dictatorship governments, governments that are not willing to be held accountable, governments that are not willing to allow a fair and free democratic discourse. We are increasingly seeing repression from even some of the countries where we think democracy will be respected, will be enshrined within the constitution of the day. But that is not the case. We are witnessing leaders who are not willing to listen to the majority, and the majority are the people. The people have the voice. The people are willing to engage in a free and fair society. But that is not the case with the current leaders of today. If we are talking about the respect of rule of law, then we will not have a leader such as Trump who would go after, or rather feel protective when his own sort of insecurities are compromised. We're now talking about issues to do with having a fair democratic election. And as East Africa, we've seen opposition figures like Kizza Besigye. Is a top Ugandan opposition figure. He was abducted in Nairobi and driven all the way to Uganda. This cannot happen in a democratic country. This has to be a coalition between the Kenyan government, security officers, and those of Ugandan, because there cannot be in any way a top opposition figure in Uganda who can be dragged all the way. And next we see him appearing in a military court in Uganda. So this is a culture that we are tolerating, which is even sad to say. And this is why you tend to see a number of youth uprising happening all over the world.
Yes.
That young people are willing to pay the ultimate price to ensure that democracy is protected and that we are living in a world where our
Indeed.
voices, our opinions are listened, but are also implemented in the policies that matter.
Yes.
For the
Sorry, Geoffrey. I have to interrupt you now because we only have a few minutes left. I also wanted to listen to David's perspective. You're so eloquent, Geoffrey, and I love the way you describe this to us. But David, why do you think the pushback is so hard right now?
I mean, we are in an entirely absurd situation. I agree entirely with what Geoffrey said. Sweden used to be a country which was seen as progressive in terms of environmental laws, climate, and human rights. But that is being abandoned rapidly. Now we have a government that increases emissions in the midst of the ongoing climate catastrophe. They are supporting Israel in the midst of an ongoing genocide in Gaza. And when activists speak up about it, they are being threatened and repression is taking place. Activists as well as immigrants are being used as scapegoats by the politicians for all kinds of problems. And the results of such rhetoric we feel on the ground. This is not happening by mistake. It's rather done very systematically and strategically. And it very much matches the playbook of fascist power grabs that have taken place historically. I'm extremely concerned that this is the direction that our societies are going towards. So with this in mind, the most important thing we all have to do is to show disobedience and resistance when our democracies are being dismantled step by step.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David, and thank you, Geoffrey, for these strong statements. We really have to stand up with courage for democracy and be brave to protest and also to support the ones that are being threatened by the oppression that we see in many countries in many regions of the world. So now we're going to move on and watch a film about the only royal, at least known to us, that has been imprisoned for her activism. So a few days ago, we met with Princess Marie Esmeralda of Belgium. We met her here at the COP, and let's hear what she has to say.
So we're here at the media center at COP30 here in Belém. And I have a very interesting guest to interview, and we will talk about that democracy is currently under threat. And with me here, I have the honor to have Esmeralda of Belgium with me. Welcome to our interview.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
And it's so great to see you again. First time we met were actually just a month ago at the Vatican's Climate Summit. It was quite interesting experience with Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Pope, and it were so many great climate advocate people there. And your story, how you became this climate activist as a princess, were very interesting. So for the viewers that were not there, can you tell them about how did you end up here in Belém for the climate meeting?
So I have been to so many COPs over the last 10 years. Yes, since Paris Agreement. So that's not something strange for me to be here. But because it's in the middle of the Amazon, I mean, it's a very symbolic COP. And I wanted to be here specifically.
And how did you become involved in the climate and environment issue from the beginning?
Well, it's a bit of a personal story because my father was very involved in the protection of the environment way before the time it became fashionable. I'm talking about the 1930s. And so when I was a child in the 60s, 70s, I heard all his stories. I got really love for nature and also for indigenous cultures and wisdom and rights. So this is something that started very early. But then came the climate crisis. My father was not there anymore. He passed away in the 80s. But then it became something of an existential crisis and multiple crises. And I thought, okay, I'm a journalist, but I need to do more. I have to become an activist.
And what year was this?
This was, I would say, the beginning of the 90s.
That's quite early. Was it kind of a trigger point, or was it just slowly growing into your conscience?
Slowly growing, and especially meeting all the communities that are the most affected. So indigenous communities, local communities, women, because we know that it's not a crisis which is gender neutral. Women are really very much affected. And so I became really involved in all those different crises.
And you have been doing this for quite a while now. Have you seen something different happening in this space? Because now it's become so polarized and political to be advocating for climate. When did you first observe this kind of change?
Actually, I'm really worried because, you know, I was with Extinction Rebellion. I was also arrested, but that was in 2019. And that was more or less okay. And obviously I didn't risk so much. I went to jail, but for a few hours. But now I have many colleagues who are in jail in the UK for 4, 5 years. I mean, climate activism is now treated like terrorism. And this is in our countries, but you can imagine in other countries where it's more difficult, when there's less democracy, it's even worse. For example, Ecuador, for the moment, they are really clamping down on NGOs, and especially indigenous NGOs. So we have to mobilize and say, I mean, the terrorists are not the activists. The terrorists are the ones who are destroying our planet.
But wait a minute now. You're a member of the royal family in Belgium, and you have been arrested. How did that happen? Because that is not happening to everyone. What did you do?
Well, I was in a protest, which was a peaceful protest. We were sitting on the street. We were hundreds of us. And of course, there were hundreds who were arrested. I was among them.
And how did the police react when they understood who you were?
Well, they didn't know. So when they said they had to tell my embassy because I was not a UK citizen, I said, oh no, do you have to? And they said, they never react. Don't worry, never. I said, maybe. So they put me in jail, and like 2 hours later, the guy came, and very British. He said to me, you were right, they called. But as I tell you, it was not the climate that we have now, which is really erosion of human rights and democracy.
So if you have been in that protest today, 5 years later, in 2025, what do you think would have happened to you today?
Well, I'm privileged. There is no other word for that. And I would have probably another treatment. But I'm thinking about all the ones that have not that treatment, that lose their job, that stay in jail, and that's not acceptable.
What do we need to do to get the leaders to understand that you're not a terrorist, you're actually trying to save the planet, and everyone else that is working here try to do the same? What do we need to do to change this very negative development around the climate protest topic?
I think the citizens have really to unite, and many different sectors, like the faith, like obviously the trade unions, like we have to mobilize all sectors of the civil society, because unfortunately some leaders are going that way to restrain our rights. So we have to make a lot of noise, we have to react.
Yeah, there's some new studies saying that 89% of population actually support climate action, but they believe they are alone. So they are not doing so much because they think they are alone in this. When they look at the leaders and how policymakers are making decisions in the other direction, it's easy to understand that it sometimes can feel very lonely. What do you think we that are active in the climate space can do to get them more active? What is needed from people like you and me?
I think everyone can do something, because yes, you're right, some people feel overwhelmed and say I have no power. First of all, it's not true. We have the power, the people have the power to elect the leaders, to talk to their banks and say I don't want to support dark activities like fossil fuels or I don't know, armament and all that. We can talk to our friends, to our family, we can have a big movement, but we have to do it. And everyone can do a small thing. Some can do big things, but everyone can do something.
I agree. I'm also wondering that you're quite unique member of a royal family, very outspoken and not very fearless, and I love that. What I see, a lot of people are looking up to kings and queens and princes around a lot of topics. Do you see that you can influence your cousins, so to say? For Sweden, it's a little bit weird. We didn't have a minister representing us. We did actually have the king. Perhaps you even met him. How do you see we can mobilize the royals around the world for this topic? We all know that the King of United Kingdom were very outspoken before he became a king. Now he's not as much outspoken. He tried to balance it, but this is not really the time to balance things. Or what do you say?
No, but it's very difficult for the King of England, obviously, because it's the government which decides all that matter. But he has been a great voice all over his life, and the Prince of Wales is also now an active, I wouldn't say activist, but environmentalist, which is very important.
And do you see that more can be mobilized to be more outspoken, maybe that are not kings or queens, but are near those in royal?
I think we have to move to the other level. We need to be radical, because we need a radical change of mind, a radical change of system, and not something just cosmetic, which will allow the system to stay the same. If we want to talk about the fossil fuels, it should be the COP that decides the just transition. But we have been waiting all those years to have even the mention. So now President Lula said it's the COP of the truth. So I hope that will be the outcome.
The truth will be the outcome, but we will see what it decide. That's another thing. And if you are dreaming, what will be the dream COP realistically that can be achieved here in the negotiations?
I think the most obvious is the just transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, because we are on that path. All the businesses know that we are on that path. But now we need the policymaker to have the courage to decide that. That's one thing. The other one, of course, is nature. Nature is completely destroyed. We have to make those two fights together much stronger. And I would say, obviously, the money, because it's always the problem of the money. So much has been promised for the countries which are at the forefront of the climate. Remember, we just had a terrible hurricane in Jamaica. The country is absolutely destroyed. That just before the COP, it shows us the way we have to do and help those countries.
And what do you think the viewers of this interview can do to advocate for climate, but also defend the right to advocate for climate? What is your pledge to them?
Yes, please, to make alliances, to meet all sorts of different sectors, to talk about it, and also to defend the defenders, because those are the ones that are killed every week defending the environment, indigenous and from local communities, for us, for our future.
Thank you so much for joining, and you are a true inspiration, and it's an honor to have you as a guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We've now heard about the threats to science and democracy, but what are the solutions? How can we strengthen democracy to reduce disinformation, a big topic, by the way, here at the COP, and to protect journalists, activists, and scientists? With us here to talk about this are Yael Eisenstadt. I hope I've got that vaguely right. Director of Policy and Impact, Cybersecurity for Democracy at NYU in the United States. And Eva Morel, Secretary General of Quota Climate, Climate Media Monitoring, non-profit headquartered in France. Great. Yael, if I've said your name wrong, please correct it for me. You have spent more than 20 years combating... It's close enough. Thank you very much. You have spent more than 20 years combating extremism, polarization, and anti-democratic behavior both on and offline. Could you please tell us about some countermeasures against anti-democratic behavior that work?
Sure. So that's a big task to say what does work. I mean, part of what I just want to sort of set the stage following what the last interview I was just listening to. Any major issue that requires people to start from a shared basic set of facts requires an information landscape that does not only distort facts, but is actually able to be so easily manipulated both by bad actors and by the way the platforms themselves are often designed and monetized. And so understanding that part of it, right? If you want to talk about how to battle climate change, and you're not even starting from not even just the same set of facts, but you're not even hearing the same thing that perhaps your neighbor is hearing just because you're being targeted so differently with such different messages online, then how can we possibly come together to solve such a hugely consequential issue? And so, sure, there's lots of different ways that people can engage differently online. There are ways that you can work to ensure you're amplifying the good work of people in your space. There's ways to ensure that you are not allowing yourself to fall for false narratives. But the bigger part of it is I don't want to imply that the responsibility for our really consequential and difficult online information landscape right now should fall on individual shoulders. We have to insist that our social media platforms, the distributors of information, that they become better actors themselves in this space. And at least in Europe and some other places, you see some movement from government in that direction. I'm happy to go into more detail, but I just wanted to kind of give that bigger picture first.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. I mean, yes, social media is a different world for all of us in some ways. But what I also seem to notice is with my children who are 32, 30, and 28, they don't treat it half as seriously as maybe I do, because I think, it should be honest and correct. They just blow through it and seem to think it's not a problem. But anyway, let's go to Eva, or is it Ava? Ava, okay. We've heard from journalists who are being threatened for their reporting, but quota climate works from the other end. You're taking media organizations to court for spreading misinformation. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I completely agreed what has been said. At Kotai Climate, we work on the way traditional media cover climate change and environmental issues. And what we realized is that the quantity and the quality of environmental information spread was very low in comparison to other topics. And that was ineffective in putting in motion decision makers and at the political but also economic levels. And more we diagnosed a surge of climate disinformation in news media. What we realized is first that the diagnosis was very poor. A lot of studies document the way climate disinformation spreads online, but not really in traditional media, meaning the TV, the radio, and the press. So first, we wanted to calculate the quantity of cases of climate disinformation on news media. And the way we define disinformation in comparison to misinformation is the presence of contradiction on live by journalists when something falls, when the facts are contradicted. After that, we realized that in France, it was in 8 months of airtime, so between January and August 2025, more than 500 cases that we diagnosed. And there was no body of law able at the moment to act upon this threat. And we also feel like it's a collective problem, and that shouldn't only be individuals that tackle the issue with their ability to differentiate opinions and facts. So this is why we went to the independent media regulator, the ARCOM at the French level, to raise, I think we did 25 complaints at that moment. And for the first time, 2 weeks ago, the higher administrative court in France, the Conseil d'État, said for the first time that climate disinformation in news media was a breach of citizens' right to correct information. And for the first time, they validated the first financial penalty. And this is the type of things we do at French level, but it is also the type of things we promote here at COP30, because for the first time, climate disinformation is a topic of the discussion here, promoted by President Lula, but also by the UN and UNESCO. And the big achievement that we would like to have is for a declaration to be signed by the majority of countries here to say that integrity of information integrity is just the basis for good negotiations on climate change.
So maybe I can come back to you, Yael. So maybe just elaborate a little bit about what you said, because you said it's, if I understand it correctly, the kind of information you're receiving will obviously shape your view, but it might be completely different to your next door neighbor. Is there some way of resisting, for example, say, social media once it gets its jaws into you? If you've been reading certain things and now it thinks this is what you want, you know, in other words, shaping your views. Is there a reset button on the algorithms that you can press and say, maybe I didn't really want all that rubbish about climate change is made up by aliens from the planet Zong or something like that? What can we do as citizens to counter this ourselves at home? I don't know.
Sure. I mean, some of it, again, is a little bit of an unfair battle, but what we can do individually is first and foremost recognize that social media is intentionally playing on our emotions as opposed to being a real source of necessarily truthful information. Now, it doesn't mean, I don't want to imply that people shouldn't believe anything they see online or that they shouldn't use social media. I still use it. But understanding that when you receive something that immediately strikes a very emotional reaction, whether a positive or a negative, take a beat, take a breath. Take a second before you immediately repost it, engage with it, get outraged by it, especially with more and more sophisticated artificially generated content being posted and used now. It really, again, so much of the reasons that such bad information can be amplified and spread like wildfire online is because it's intentionally playing to our emotions. And so just recognizing a little bit of that, learning how to take a second before you share anything, learning how to, if it is something that you find to be really important, learning how to look at who is the source of this information, even just that. Figuring out, does this come from a reputable news source? Is this coming from just some random person online? Being a little more educated in how we use the platforms is one way to help inoculate ourselves a bit against those who are intentionally trying to manipulate us online.
It's quite interesting. I mean, I'm not saying this is exclusively in the US, but it also seems that the politics has been trying to also start saying, well, those so-called trusted news sources are also full of fake news, right? So you shouldn't trust the New York Times, you shouldn't trust the Washington Post, there it's all made up and it's all fake and it's all anti-my political party, right? I mean, the BBC gets this in Britain. Whenever there's a new government in, they always feel that the BBC isn't treating them fairly, because normally the BBC actually tries to, hold the government to account, whether they're left or right. But
well, so that's a really important point, and I do apologize. I'm going to have to leave in 2 minutes. What you just said there, though, is such an important point. I know we're here to talk about how to combat climate change, but it is important in the US, very much we're experiencing this right now, to understand that is a page out of the authoritarian playbook. Make sure that people don't believe anything. Make sure that they don't trust in the news. And the only thing we can do as citizens who don't want to be constantly manipulated with false information is to fight for a free press, is to push back against it. That's why I said, I don't want the takeaway from my words to be, don't trust anything you read, because then that gets us to a very dangerous place as well. But how can we push for more investment in media, push back against the narratives that are happening to make us not trust in media? It is a really complicated battle, but critical if we want to tackle any of our biggest global challenges.
Thanks, that's good. Just looking from your perspective then, I mean, you're trying to tackle kind of deliberate disinformation by the media. Is that because, I mean, okay, I was a journalist for 13 years on the Times newspaper in London, and I did occasionally get the odd thing wrong, but there was a kind of sense of that you were trying to somehow get it right. But there are some newspapers that, you know, are well funded by, you know, say the private sector, or well funded by organizations that want to peddle a certain narrative, which may not be true.
Yeah, I want to make a distinction between the actors and the vectors of climate disinformation. When we talk about the media spreading disinformation, we are not specifically saying that they are themselves the source of the disinformation, but just that they are the objective of every disinformation campaign that want to reach mainstream media to be normalized and then trusted, or just to insinuate that we don't trust anyone, and that's a danger for democracy, as was being said. The climatologist from the US, Michael Mann, said that there was this coalition of the unwilling that was spreading disinformation campaigns, which is composed of the fossil industry, the attention economy, foreign interferences, and extreme right movements. And recently, he added that some of the media were part of the coalition of the unwilling, specifically for the reason that we outlined, is that we have this in France and we have this all over the world. Some private interest media have vested interest in this information because it creates audience, it creates revenue, it's profitable to disseminate this information at the moment. And so it's become this economic warfare between two types of economic models within the media. And this is why we make a distinction between public interest media and vested interest media to talk about the media that spread this information themselves.
This is very interesting because I've seen a rise just recently in terms of the number of kind of fake images of lovely birds standing dead on the floor next to wind turbines, which is an old playbook by the fossil fuel industry to make you think that all beautiful birds are being killed by wind turbines. And again, pictures of electric cars on fire. I think, you know, most electric cars don't catch on fire, but they're trying to create the narrative that electric cars generally are a bit risky, you know. So I'm seeing a resurgence of this, perhaps because, you know, the renewable energy story is so powerful now, it's taking over, it's doubling every 2.5 years. The fossil fuel industry are in danger of losing their business model. So maybe they're fighting even harder with disinformation. Yeah, I'll come back to us. You wanted to make a point. Sorry.
Yeah, and then I have to leave. I'm so sorry. That last point was one of the most critical things that people need to understand. And that's really the core of what we work on. There will always be people who have incentives to put out anti-climate messages. There'll be people from industry, all sorts. But what you just pointed out, it has also become profitable online to create content that is really controversial. So you have some people who understand that stoking fears, engaging in conspiracy theories, and sometimes that happens to align with conspiracy theories about climate. If you can build up a bigger and bigger audience doing so, you can also get financially rewarded for doing so. So it's really important to understand part of why I work so much on the incentives for how these companies operate is because that is one of the downstream effects. Everyday people have discovered that they can make a lot of money by engaging in really controversial stuff online if they can be salacious enough to grow an audience. And so that was a really important point I just wanted to emphasize. I'm sorry I have to go, but thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation.
This live show, we've got 2 million viewers today in 150 countries. So thanks for having the time to be with us. Thank you. We've got a couple of more minutes or seconds.
I wanted to make a segue between what she said on social media and the way it's profitable in news media is the fact that nowadays you need to make news in a way that's accentuating cleavages so that people stay a bit more because they want to feel emotion. And climate change is a bit rough in terms of covering it because it's scientific information at the root of it. And then everything that's happened here is very technical. And to the people that talk about it in a very simplistic way, by disinforming, of course, and moving from old denial to what you said, new denial, which is more disinformation on the solutions of the transition and not only on the pure scientific observation that climate change exists or it's caused by humans, that's making people worry. Because, well, they are fearing that windmills are going to be popping up all over their homes, that electricity is going to be more costly, stuff like that. And so news media that have an interest in having a distance with the fact to create more audience have the very same interest that social platforms that use the same tactics. And so this is why we feel that when we talk about climate disinformation, this narrative should include all the informational ecosystem, and we could even add the AI industry now, which is spreading this information even more. We could cite Gawkerpedia, which is, well, now an industry of disinformation, right? And so if we take all that points of the disinformation ecosystem, we understand that it's fluid, And we can not only rely on social media to act upon the issue, but journalists should be really counterpowers to this machine that's in motion and growing at the moment.
Yes, emotion-driven, and also it plays very nicely to those that feel they're victims of some decision taken high up in government somewhere, and it affects them, and they're losing out. And I think that's another phenomenon right now.
Yeah, the International Panel on the Information Environment, which is kind of the IPCC on climate disinformation, published a report recently saying that the end goal of climate disinformation campaign was exactly what you said, to reach decision makers and to make them feel alone, that they were acting on climate change against public opinion, and that they should take a step back on this issue and focus on, for example, immigration and the economy. And that's actually a lie, because public support is very strong and remaining quite strong, even if we are feeling that there is this backlash all over the world. And climate disinformation has to be tackled at the very effect it produces. We need to bring the story back to the support it generates to act on climate change. And this is why the COP of the people that we are living here today is quite strong in that story building.
Yeah. We've got to leave it there because we're now kind of way over on this point. I want to thank Yale, who's now gone. I want to thank you for being with us here today. And earlier in this session, we heard from the director of the documentary, The White House Effect. In our next session, we'll turn our attention to another great documentary produced in collaboration with the United Nations Development Programme. So please stay with us. I think every single person on this planet needs to be educated and re-educated about climate change. We are dedicated as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to embrace this education issue.
We can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally say, tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
State Congress voted to ban abortion. Alternate universe located.
Global temperatures rise.
The effects on social media on Generation Z.
To avoid catastrophe, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs, the epicenter of a global pandemic